if you're in the gym and you're sitting down on the bench and you're doing the lat pull downs where your hands are up there and you're bringing the bar behind your back to work on your lats, and we face the lat pull down machine and we just do it in that way.
Mhm.
So if you wanted to do something that was more fascial and not just muscular, you would do a set, you would reduce the weights by about 30%. Okay. And you would pull that lat bar down and you would start to rotate. And right now, if the audience could see me, I would be rotating in my chair from left and to right so that I'm working the
This.
fibers in multiple directions. Exactly.
Mm.
Okay. And then because I've got a lighter weight, I would keep it a little more rhythmic, and I would every once in a while throw in a random mini bounce. So I would pull the bar down and then let it pull my arms back up automatically.
David Lesondak, a warm welcome to the Your Body's Way podcast. I was just saying how happy I am to have you on this podcast, because I know you must be insanely busy with your own stuff going on, which I know is a lot. So I just wanted to say a warm welcome. How are things over there in Pittsburgh, you said?
Yes, Pittsburgh. Things here are great. Spring is
Mm.
arriving early. I'm looking out my window and seeing the cherry buds on the tree, and I'm talking to them regularly and giving them stern looks to say, "Don't get carried away. We still have some weather coming below zero, so don't get carried away." But things are pretty good here. I'm delighted to be on the podcast. I'm always happy to talk to people about fashion.
Yes, and I can't wait to hear about it. I mean, I have been diving into your book, so I have the Kindle version here. It's the second edition.
Ah, okay, the second edition,
The
great.
second
Yeah,
edition. So there's a lot of
yes, the
glare
hot pink
here.
edition. Yeah.
Yes, I
Mhm.
really like the cover. It's a great cover.
Thank you. That is a sculpture. People think that's a digital image, but that is a life-size sculpture.
Is it?
Yeah,
God, that looks
and it
digital,
and
100%.
it and it has lights wired into it. But when we took the photos of it with the lights on, it looked like the kind of things you don't want to see on medical films. So we decided to not use the version in person. It's stunning, but it was a little hard to capture in a photograph.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
that's the artist is credited on the credits page on the inside. I'm blanking on his name right now. Forgive me, but he does amazing work.
right. So it's called
So
Fascia, what it is and why it matters. So it's the second
yes,
edition. Did you find
it
you
is the
needed
second
to
edition.
make, did you need to make many changes in the second edition from the first?
Good question. Yes and no. I was very happy that we didn't have to take anything out of the first edition
Mm.
because it was wrong.
Mm.
So that's always sweet. But there was additions that needed to be made. So what I really wanted them to do was to put one of those big starburst stickers on it that said no with 30% more science, because that was about the ratio. I'd say it's about a third more content, to use
Of
a trendy word,
course.
than the first edition, because we learned more about the superficial fascia, which we still are. There's the interstitium, which was something that came out after the book. There was the whole fascial net plastination project, which now ends the third chapter, the anatomy chapter, about 8 or 10 pages worth, which was the first attempt to create a body worlds type anatomy exhibits that were totally fascially focused, which had never been attempted before. And that was a 4-year project between the Plastinarium and volunteers from the Fascia Research Society. Some of my very best friends were intensely involved in that, and that needed to be highlighted as well.
Wow. I did not know. So are you talking about the body works that used to travel around?
Yes.
Does it still travel around the world?
Oh,
Doing
it
its
does. It
exhibits?
does. It
Yeah, it
it
has to.
it
You
it
can't get rid of
travels
stuff like
around,
that. You have to keep going. Like,
but there's an entire wing of the Permanent Body Worlds exhibit in Berlin now that
right.
is devoted to fascia and has all of the pieces and then some that you
Oh my
see in
gosh.
highlighted in the book are all there in Berlin. So it's
So
worth
like
going to Berlin
I'm
just to do that.
right. I mean, I can imagine, because when you talk about fascia in your book, first of all, I have to say that I thought I knew something about fascia because my background is I used to
Hmm.
teach at a fairly, entry level, like muscles, and I used to talk about fascia, and I was very fascinated by it. I've been on a few
Hmm.
cadaver courses, and I have a passion for it. I really enjoy the topic of fascia. So I thought I knew something about fascia at least. But then when I read your book, I was like, I know nothing. I literally know nothing about fascia. And what I really want people to know
Thank
today
you.
in this episode
Hmm.
is how important it is and how it is really involved in everything it physically. And so when you talk about Berlin and you talk about the wing, all about fascia, it makes me think, gosh, it must literally cover everything, like from the organs to the cells to the nervous system to the circulatory
No,
system. Like,
it's not quite that extensive. Not
oh,
quite
okay,
that
not
extensive.
that like on a
Yes,
cellular
yes.
level,
We
yeah.
yeah, no, we don't have cellular level stuff in that
Okay.
exhibit. But there are a lot of stunning pieces, including Freya, which is the first fascially focused full body plastination, and the pictures do not do her justice. I remember working on some writing material with Rochelle Clausen, who was one of the core team who helped create Freya and document the process. And she referred to her in print as beautiful. And I'm like, I don't think we can refer to a corpse as beautiful. I just think people are going to read that and think that's strange. And then I saw her and I was like, oh my God, she's beautiful. It is really, really a stunning presentation. um she almost, and of course part of it is everything I'm bringing to it, but I've seen plenty of body worlds exhibits in my
Same.
lifetime.
Yeah,
But
same.
I've never seen anything where I was just gobsmacked, if you will.
Mm.
Just couldn't take my eyes off her, and we displayed her at the 2022 uh, World Fascia Research Congress in Montreal, and I was privileged to be involved with Rochelle and my friend Gary Carter and a few other people in setting up the exhibit and actually like taking her out of the crate and positioning her in the room, which was like kind of mind blowing and also super mundane at the same time. But it was
Interesting.
actually nice because in Berlin she's in a giant lucite box to protect her, to keep the dust out. I get it, but because we were in a small exhibit room in a hotel, and the cost of shipping a lucite container you don't want to get into, so she was able to be freestanding. I mean, so there was no barrier between your eyes and her, and that's just an experience I will always remember.
Wow. And that's the reason to go to Berlin to have a look for sure.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, and for fashion nerds like us, it's
yeah.
great to just hang back and watch people, normies, walk in and just watch them be captivated and fascinated by this whole aspect of the Berlin exhibit.
As I have to say, reading your book was really interesting, and I love the history of things. I love reading into the background stories of where things come
Mm-hmm.
from. And there's a chapter in your book that talks about where fascia, when people started to kind of talk about it, and you go through how fascia, which is still largely, I think, ignored to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not many
Yes.
when you look at the anatomy diagrams in books, you don't have a fascia diagram. Like you have a muscle diagram, you have a bone diagram, you have a circulatory diagram, but you don't have like a fascia diagram. So they don't really talk about it like a system. But in your book, you're like, fascia is a system. It's super important. But I love how in your book you said, even back in, in the very earliest times when they used to cut up cadavers and they started to learn about the physiology of humans, and they were drawing diagrams of muscles, and
Mm-hmm.
they weren't talking about it. It's they used to throw it away, right, as like medical waste. And I mean, talk about the when
I,
fascia started to
sure,
become
sure. I think
recognized.
that's a slightly more modern phenomenon. But thank you for the compliment about the way I tell the story. So in the early days, obviously, they didn't have preservatives. But the thing that I'm thinking about Jean Claude Guimberteau, um, and is he has said when you're looking at, when you're learning about the body from a dead body, um, it's no longer under tension. So you've got so part of the fascial system is about tension. Part of the fascial system is about fluid, and both those things are gone
Mm.
when you are working with an embalmed cadaver. Now there are other types of preserving techniques that are more fascia friendly. However, nothing beats the experience of actually working on a fresh tissue, unembalmed specimen, because that's as close as you can get to actually seeing fascia in the wild, unless you're a hunter and you dress your own game very
Mm.
quickly, or if you have the opportunity, like I did in Germany, to dissect a freshly euthanized rat, and you can actually see the liveliness in the
Mm.
system because it's not the organism is dead, but the everything else in the organism has not started to decay. And in a typical embalmed specimen, the connective tissue is stringy, I'm going to say chewy.
Chewy. I hope you don't know
Okay,
that.
I think I've just revealed something about myself I didn't want people to know. It's very stringy, it's tough, it's greasy, it's beigeish gray. It's just kind of gross, and it's in the way of all the cool stuff that you see in the books that you want to see in real life. So it just was, along with the fat layers, was just chucked in the bin. And then, but the other stuff, the skin, the liver, this, that, and the other, that all gets reflected, which means that you cut it in a way that you can peel it back, but it's still attached, excuse me, somewhere to the body. And or if it's completely removed, it's bagged and it's tagged so that all the parts and pieces with that particular cadaver stay together, because likely it's going to be returned to the family at some point for cremation or burial or whatever their wishes were. So the point of this long story being that the stuff you throw away, you kind of have an unconscious um, bias towards, well, it can't be that important because we threw it away. We don't, when we get takeaway, we don't eat the container and throw out the food. We take the food out and we throw away the container or recycle it or whatever. So it does kind of set up an unconscious bias, I think, in a way, to say, well, this is just the packing material. This is just the peanuts, the bubble wrap in between the layers that keep things separate. So there were always people along the way who looked at things and said, "Ah, wait, this has to be doing something. Maybe we can figure out what it is." But it's only really been in the last 30 years, I want to say, that we've had the kind of mindset, technology, and ability to test, examine, and explore the fascial system. And Carla Stecco is a great example of that. Her father was a physio who worked predominantly with the fascial system, and she, of course, grew up hearing about it from the time she was so high, and had her father treat her various different ways. And when she decided to go to medical school and become an orthopedic surgeon, but then when she was doing some of her graduate work, she thought, I want to go into the lab, and I want to see this stuff that my dad talks about. And she went down a very deep, long, and wonderful rabbit hole, and now is one of our bright lights in research and development right now. So it's a progression, and I think people need to understand that about science, about medicine, about most everything in life. There is a progression. Some ideas take hold and become really exciting. And then maybe 10, 20 years from now, not so much. Others take a long time to develop and come to light. And just happens to be fascist time to come to light and get some much needed and overdue recognition.
And it's really important that people know what fascia is and why it's important to know about it, because I believe that once you know what fascia is and how everything is connected, like from the muscles in your head down to the muscles in your feet and your organs, and everything is connected by fascia. And once you understand that, surely you can be able to train better, exercise better, stretch better. You'll have more understanding of where your pain might be coming from and who to seek for help. The true people who can really help you, because they understand fascia and how, you know, if you have a pain somewhere, then it could be coming from somewhere completely different. And so I just think it's so important that people know about fascia, because it might change the way that they actually live and seek help if they need it. So can you, David, just go
100%.
into what fascia is?
And why it matters?
Okay, so and why it matters. So okay, so your book goes into great detail, but for the layman, for someone
Sure,
who's like,
sure.
okay, what is
hmm
this?
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is this stuff we've been talking about? You're like, okay, what is it? All right. So let's use the orange example. I'm going to give you two examples here. So the classic thing is take an orange and rather than peel it, cut it right down the middle. And when you look at it, you're going to see the outer orange layer of the orange, which would be like your skin, your epidermis. And then underneath it, you're going to see the whitish rind. And then that whitish rind is going to break off and create these little pockets that all the good orangey goodness resides in that we want to eat and juice or do whatever with. That white stuff that keeps each of those sections of orange separate but connects them all into the whole of the orange. That's your fascia. However, in living organisms like you, like me, like your dog, that fascia is biodynamic, which means it is capable of change and it involves both support and extensibility. So it's kind of like, to use another metaphor, and it comes in layers that are woven. So it's like an inner biological pair of Spanx that give you support where you need it, but give you pliability and mobility where you need it. And it's a plastic system. It's a two-way system. So depending on how you train, where you train, what you train for, will slowly adapt to that if you're doing it right, or changing jobs or being more physical or learning a musical instrument or whatever. But fascia is a slow changing system. And we live, unfortunately, in a let's get it done and let's make it fast and faster is better kind of world. And in the world of fascia, not so much. It's a slower process. So I very happy at the tender age of 60 to still be part of the counterculture.
Mm. So when it comes to sports, I can imagine having your fascia that's holding onto your muscles and your bones and your ligaments, your tendons, and I can imagine that getting it stronger and in certain areas is really important because of the repetitive movement. Like let's say a tennis player, they need to be able to have this kind of strong side, and then the fascia responds to that. But then would you say for everyday life, people who don't do any sports, would you say that's the importance of having as much variation in their training regime as possible? Because your fascia adapts to what you do repetitively. And if you're always doing a lunge one direction, then if you change it one day, then your fascia is not going to be as, it's not going to
Yeah, I once I
support
once
movement as
treated a
much.
yoga I once treated a yoga teacher, and they had a peculiar set of one-sided symptoms.
Interesting. And
And
yoga, but
yeah,
you think yoga is like all sides, like inversions and
aha, but we're talking we're
opposites
talking
and
we're talking we're talking about a yoga teacher here
okay.
who did a lot of inversions and crazy arm balances and things,
Hmm.
and spent 20 years leading the class and doing the demos all on, yes, there's, yes, she just had
Ah,
the aha moment, everybody,
okay.
all on one side.
Right.
So over a period of a couple of decades, things adapted in a way that suddenly in their early 50s they were having problems that they didn't want to have, and were considerably distressed about them. But we didn't realize that right away. That actually came out in therapy as we were working together and starting to make some of the changes to bring her to a better point of balance, that she took what she was learning in my treatment room back out into the wild and went, oh, this is what I've been doing. And that's part of it. And that's why, all the, and of course I'm biased because I'm a hands-on therapist, but the self-help tools are great. I use them myself. I've got a little shoulder thing I'm working on right now, so I will use balls, rollers, and heating things. But I also need a guide. I need somebody who can stand outside of me and maybe see the things, find the things that I just have a blind spot about. And
Mm.
that to me is one of the most important aspects of getting any kinds of hands-on fascial therapy, is that the person is working with you to help decode, to help figure out what it is that got you there in the first place. A lot of times people know I had a knee replacement. I fell down the stairs. There was some sort of accident that happened, even if it was years earlier. But a lot of times, what I hear, I want to say 50% of the time, is people wake up and they go, I don't know what I did, but suddenly I woke up and I was hurting everywhere. Because there's just a point where the body autonomically begins to compensate and make adjustments. And then one day it just runs out of options and you wake up in pain and you're like, I didn't do anything. But it was accumulation of things you did over time. I think I got rather far afield of your root question here, Tamara, and I apologize for that.
I mean,
You're asking what
yeah.
what can normal people do?
I mean, I was so
Pay
I
attention.
mean,
Pay attention. They can
yeah.
pay attention. Variation is good,
Mm.
and bouncing is good.
Mm.
Okay, so fascia, you have to think about the fact that in a lot of places in the body, not all places in the body, you've got fibers coming at one angle, fibers coming at another angle. So if you think about trying to stretch stretchy material, you'll see that same kind of weaving in a pair of Spanx, in a pair of pantyhose, in things like that, that you've got fibers going one direction, fibers going in the other direction, so that it has areas where it stretches and areas where it's super supportive simultaneously. So if you're always doing the same kind of training, you might be very good at certain kinds of things, but you could get blindsided from something else. So, one of my favorite examples to talk about is if you're in the gym and you're sitting down on the bench and you're doing the lat pull downs where your hands are up there and you're bringing the bar behind your back to work on your lats. And we face the lat pull down machine and we just do it in that way.
Mhm.
So if you wanted to do something that was more fascial and not just muscular, you would do a set, you would reduce the weights by about 30%. Okay. And you would pull that lat bar down and you would start to rotate. And right now, if the audience could see me, I would be rotating in my chair from left and to right so that I'm working the
This.
fibers in multiple directions. Exactly.
Mm.
Okay. And then because I've got a lighter weight, I would keep it a little more rhythmic and I would every once in a while throw in a random mini bounce. So I would pull the bar down and then let it pull my arms back up automatically. I once were because that essence of bounce is part of the resilience of the fascial network. I once worked with an 11-year-old gymnast. She was awesome, but she was having some problems that we very quickly were able to determine that she no longer had bounce in her ankle joints, those hard landings that gymnasts do. And so she had developed a very rigid foot, ankle, and lower calf scenario. So I had to teach her how to rock through her feet again, make it easier for her, obviously, with the therapy, and then teach her how to bounce again.
Mm.
And that pretty much cleared up the problem for her. And that's what tends to happen as we get older. That spring in our step that we love
Nice.
and that we
Yeah.
see in some people. We need to do things to inculcate that. I've talked about this for years. I've done nothing with it, but I think we should, I think adults should skip more.
Mm. I like that.
But at the same time, I go, if I go skipping down the street in my neighborhood, what are people going to think?
I'm so glad you
So
brought
I
this
want to.
up.
I think
Yeah.
we need to start an adult skipping movement, and we need to realize that that is really really important. And the other thing too, though, is that you don't want to train your fascia every day.
Mm.
Okay,
Okay.
so if you're a 5 day a week kind of workout person, that's great, but I wouldn't go skipping every day. I do it like every 3 days,
Mm,
because there is a turnover cycle when you're doing these kind of bouncing rhythmic and multiplanar movements, where the cells responsible for your fascia, for maintaining the constituent components of your fascia, there is a turnover cycle where initially they start going after the areas where you're telling your body you want to move more, and then they start building up more support in the areas, and this is all based on how you use your body to impact the vibration. So it's a non nervous system, subneuronal uh, aspect of the body, and that needs time.
mm,
So 3 to 4 days, we found that when people were doing fascial training, like every couple of days, or the teachers who were teaching fascial movement were doing 3 and 4 classes a day, 3 and 4 days in a row, they were getting injuries that they didn't need. Does
right.
anyone really need an injury? No, but it's like, okay, that, a little bit of trial and error here in the research. You got to watch that you don't overdo it, just like everything else.
So does
So
is
the
this
adding. Mhm.
I was going to say, is this a good reason for people to, again, like just say someone's weight training and they do legs one day and upper body another day and they kind of split their workout? Is that also another reason? It's like not only for your muscles to recover, but also for your fascia to recover as well.
I'm not so sure about that.
Okay.
I'm not so sure about that. And again, fascia is a whole body force transmission system,
Right,
communication
right.
system. So if you're wondering what I mean by force transmission, this will give you an idea. If you're sitting at home now, if you're out for a walk listening to this, if you're driving, don't do this. But I want everybody to kind of reach their arm up into the air, just kind of take it up as far as it can go, and then stretch a little further, traction, 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 traction up to the ceiling. And you're going to find that you're going to feel something from your fingertips down your arm into your shoulder, maybe down into the side of your torso, maybe even all the way to your hips. And if you do it in standing, you might feel it even further down. So this idea of whole body communication of tension, and tension is good, too much tension is bad, is also an important part of the, not just training the fascial system from a physical standpoint, but also from a sensory standpoint. You can feel, oh, hey, yeah, that's connected all the way down there. I don't necessarily need to know all the parts, but it's good to be able to feel that, because that just embodies you in a more three-dimensional way. And that actually makes me question, Tamara, if, okay, so legs one day, upper body the next day.
Mm,
Should we segment our
right,
workouts that way? I don't know. I'm not a
right.
trainer,
Okay,
but it's a
interesting. Yeah.
question that I ask. It's like, how can I do, say, a full, like, let's do posterior day,
Mm.
okay, where we work, the posterior aspect of the legs, and the back and the connections
And
there.
would that
On
make
the
more
other
sense
hand,
to you? Like if you were to like, from your point of perspective, are you like,
mhm,
that would kind of make more sense, like just from what you know and
yeah. On the other hand, if I spend a whole day, if I spend an hour and a half doing all the slow twitch endurance muscles, as opposed to working those muscles in the back and then the fast twitch flexors in the front. So it's like, okay, that begins to change things too. I don't know. There may be
mm,
benefits to both. It doesn't have to be one way or the other.
yeah,
So, but these are just some of the things that I think about,
right.
and I would love a trainer to say, "Well, here's what I think about this," because, but it would probably get different and interesting results. So, and I'd be curious to know what those might be.
I'm really glad that you brought up the running thing because I run quite often, like just short runs. I do about 13 to 15 minutes. That's how long it takes to go around the golf course just outside here. It's lovely.
Hmm.
And I have to say, when I used to run when I was in my 20s, I had much more spring than I
Uh huh.
do now.
Okay.
So I'm 38 now. And like when I run, I definitely feel that I don't have that bounce like in my ankles.
Hmm.
So when you were talking about the 11-year-old gymnast,
Hmm.
I mean, if someone wants their spring back, let's say, just, because I see a lot of people running around here and, people obviously enjoy it. So if someone wanted to get their spring back, are there any kind of things they can do, like simple things to improve it? Would you say it's just the skipping, or is there something else that we can do?
There's a lot of things you can do. Skipping is great because the whole body is involved, but you probably, let's just say you have very stiff feet and you don't plantar flex and dorsiflex or point. And what's the thing when you don't point? Point and flex your foot very well. You might not want to start with the skipping right away.
Mm.
So, what I would recommend is starting with rocking. So, you're standing there and you're just rocking into the front of your foot, going into the back of your foot, rocking forward, rocking back, and just getting the sense of the roll through your ankle joint. Okay, because it rolls. It does. It's not a lever. It's not a pulley. It's more like a ball bearing, a little more very complicated kind of ball bearing. But you want that sense that it's just like, okay, that leg bone is rolling in that ankle joint, going back and forth, and I can feel the weight going into my toes. I can feel the weight dropping back into my heels, and I can actually alternate between one and the other, assess both ankles, both feet, see how that's going. I would start with that just to
Mm.
begin to wake that up. And then I would start doing what we refer to as mini bounces. So you would kind of get into a slightly crouched position and just kind of, just like you would be
Yeah.
bouncing on an exercise ball, but kind
Yeah.
of bouncing into the foot without putting a lot of impact on it. So you're not maybe
Mm.
even going to leave the floor. And then
Mm.
maybe once every 4 or 5, just get a little airborne and feel that impact. And gradually start to increase that. That's the way that I would work towards that. That's what I did with the gymnast. And of course, I also worked on the front of the ankle a lot. There is a anatomical structure on the front of your ankle called the retinacula, which is basically a thickening of the fascia in that area that is still being taught is basically something that holds your tendons in place.
I bet that
Not so
drives you
much. I mean, it's
crazy.
a good story. It's a good story, but think back to all, like the things that we know now that we didn't know then, and we can't. I don't think we should go back 100 years ago and say, "Why did you get that wrong?" Because that was the best they could do at the time. Often, so retinacula now, and how deep some of the fibers of the retinacula go into the bones of the ankle joint is that it's not just some extra strapping tape there to kind of give us more support and stability in the ankle, but it has 9 times the number of sensory nerves on average than any other part of the body. Why, you may ask? And to me, I think it's pretty obvious. We have not proven this in a clinical trial, but these sensory nerves are giving us real time autonomic feedback about how our foot's moving, the kind of terrain it's putting it down for. It's got to transmit that information to the knee joint, to the hip joint, and it has to happen really, really fast. So, restoring mobility in the ankle is going to improve your proprioception, your ability to feel your body in movement, and your interoception, the inner experience of what that ankle, stiff or flexible, may feel like. So, one of the worst things we do to our elderly population, I think we prematurely elderize them. Okay, that's new term I just made up. Premature elderization.
I
Write
think
that
it's
down.
it's
Trademark
quite
it.
a good one. Yeah.
Because we give them walkers, and therapeutically, maybe a walker is necessary for a short period of time, but they're too low, so people will lean forward into
Mm.
them, and what do? They shuffle their feet.
Mhm.
They don't. They don't plantar flex and dorsiflex appropriately through the ankle joint,
Mhm.
and then that changes the proprioception. So they may feel less like they're going to fall over, but we're actually doing them a disservice because they're not able to feel that natural reciprocal relationship between the contact their foot's making with the ground and what that's telling the body about the rest of what's going on under their feet. So this is whenever I work with people of a certain age who have those kinds of issues. Again, so it's not just 11-year-old gymnasts. It can be 78-year-old other people. I'm working with somebody right now who had a knee replacement 4 years ago. She's lovely, and but she was having this problem here and there with her knee still, and but she walks 3 or 4 miles a day. I mean, that's awesome, right?
Wow.
So as we're working together and getting some results here, but not necessarily all the results that I think are possible, I start asking her more about her walking routine. I know that she puts on John Philip Sousa and does a very vigorous walk, but then she explained to me that she doesn't really walk; she marches.
Mm.
So I'm like, okay, plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. You're not rolling through your ankle joint. You're picking up your foot and you're putting it right back down. You're not giving your ankle joint the stimulation it needs. And there's still aspects of her knee performance that were she wasn't happy with the function. So once we got her in her walking to be improved. Oh boy, I'm a writer. I do this professionally. Once we were able to see what she was doing in her daily routines and how to modify them appropriately,
Mm.
she started getting much better results from the therapy we were doing as well. And I don't think I'm going to be needing to see her very much longer. And she's going to be less prone to falls. She's going to be more sure on her feet. And so sometimes it's again like the yoga teacher, it's we can do all the wonderful therapies and other things, but if we don't take that out of the therapy room into the real world and see how we maybe need to modify what we're doing, we're not going to get the results that we want. And again, these results happen slowly over time. So that to me is another hallmark of anything you're doing, whether it's training or therapy and fascia, is okay, there should be an initial, oh, that felt really good for a couple of days, or oh, that really hurt the next day. But the day after, wow, that was amazing. And then a few days later, I started to notice things again. And then that starts to change week by week by week by week, so that in 2 months, 3 months of dedicated effort, you start to actually realize, oh, I'm living these changes now. Yeah, I still maybe have some stuff I'm working with, but more than not, I'm growing into the changes that I want in my body, because that's how the fascia works. You grow into it, but it takes time.
Mm. So, talking about mobility, um, me and you have both studied fascial stretch therapy. I've only gotten to level one. What level are you?
I'm a level two.
Level two. Oh, you beat me. You beat me.
Yeah, but you might
Um,
be better at it than me. It's hard to.
so Anne and Chris, they're absolutely fabulous. I love them both. And Anne
Me
and
too.
her dance moves, like I think everyone leaves just remembering that. They just remember what she does. She's brilliant. But also Chris is absolutely fabulous. But so we're talking about mobility. Is a regular static stretch, let's say someone's doing a calf stretch to increase their ankle mobility, is that as effective as doing a whole body, like whole leg, um, you know, fascial stretch routine?
Um, I have not thoroughly documented, researched all the static stretches that there are to do
Mm,
out there. So I'm not going to say all static stretching is bad.
mm,
I do think that static stretching has its limitations.
mm. And what are
Okay.
they?
Um, that they're static and they're segmental.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Because
And
that goes
maybe,
against what you just said about how you need to integrate it in your life. It's
right,
like
right.
how,
And,
what,
but
yeah.
yeah, and maybe if I've really messed something up, initially, I might need to do some of that.
Mm,
Okay.
okay.
Maybe I need to be that segmental and do that thing that just as much as anyone can stretch only one part of the body, which is kind of silly, because
Mm,
there's also, we know, transmission through the horizontal fibers in the fascia going from muscle to muscle.
mm,
uh but it's how we do it. So you talked about a calf stretch. So the typical one is you're in the corner and you're leaning in and your other leg
mm,
is back and you're doing that. um that to me is not nearly as effective as putting the balls of your feet on the edge of a step and lowering the heel on one foot and bending the knee on the opposite foot.
Yeah, I can picture
Okay,
that.
because then you're actually having gravity
Mm,
add a little extra juice to the stretch. You're getting your heel lower than your toes, which is also
mm,
important. And you're getting some of that communication from the plantar fascia around the periosteum, the fascial covering of the heel bone, up the Achilles tendon, into the calf, and maybe even all the way up into the hamstrings and the bottom of the pelvis. So you're getting something that is much more um, you know, to my way of thinking, it gets the sweet spots and it also gets that communication from the bottom of the foot all the way up to the inside bottom of the hip bone. So I prefer that one in that case. Also, because you are on the step, you can vary how much stretch you're getting by how far you're bending the opposite knee, because that will give you maybe you can find the sweet spot in the stretch. And I find that is a little more effective because, again, it's all those things and the knees getting below the foot. Now, the bad, and I learned this from my patients. They come in saying it's not working for me. I'm not. In fact, it's worse. Well, let me see how you're doing it. So what they'll do is they will drop both feet at the same time and think that they're saving time by doing both sides at once. And no, 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 no. Because what's going to happen in that thing? So it's the bent knee on the other side that's helping you attenuate the stretch on the side that you're stretching. So my left knee is bent. I'm stretching my right side. Okay. Now, once I put both heels down, okay, that's a little scary for my autonomic nervous system. Because what if my feet slip off the step? What if the step disappears? I don't know how solid is reality. But the point is, it's going to strain and it's actually going to cause a concentric contraction
correct.
to make
Yeah.
sure that you stay stable in that stretch. And that takes a full body stretch and makes it much more static.
Mm.
So, it's tricky stuff. It's tricky stuff.
And yeah, I mean, I was going to say, so, and anybody who doesn't know what fascial stretch therapy is, I mean, I loved doing it, and I think everybody loves having it done on them. So you kind of lie on a couch, and somebody, the therapist, basically
Mhm.
pulls your arms, your legs, pulls them to the side, pulls them in all different directions, and it kind of stretches your fascia like a sock. So like your entire body from head to toe, like your muscles are kind of in like this fascial kind of sock or a number of socks, like in your orange analogy. And it's
It's
just
or
basically
orange socks,
or
pantyhose
orange,
things.
so yeah.
Yeah.
And basically by doing that, you're truly stretching like correctly.
Mhm. Yeah.
And what I remember
I
them
do want to
saying,
add the key
yeah, go
component
on.
there though is traction.
That's right.
You
Yeah,
have to traction enough to
that's right.
engage the fascia. If you just kind of think of it more in a mechanical way, you're not. It's just like the difference between when we were raising our arms up earlier and
Mm,
then we really kept going and added that traction.
yeah.
That's the key component, listeners. But I'm sorry I threw you off.
No, I mean that's a really good point. And what I remember them saying, and I wonder if you can confirm this for me, because I did this course back in 2013, I think, so it's a long
Fair
time
enough.
ago.
Yeah,
But I remember
216 from
them.
2016 for me. So
Oh, okay, okay. But you're a fascial specialist, so you'll definitely know more than me in this situation. But when it comes to when you stretch, let's say you're doing a hamstring stretch, this is where it happens the most, and your leg starts shaking. Now, a lot of people, even when I'm in classes, exercise classes, a lot of people, the instructors would say, yep, that's good. Like, just keep it there. That means you're working your muscle, you're stretching. But I remember them saying in the fascial stretch therapy, Chris and Anne, I remember them saying that once it contracts, that's your muscles and your fascia kind of going into emergency mode, and it's contracting. And so actually it's contracting, it's not stretching. So
mhm.
would you agree that taking your muscles to a point at which it's shaking, that you're actually defeating the purpose at that point?
I think so. Yes.
Hmm.
The fancy word for that movement is fasciculation.
Fasciculation.
Fasciculate. Oh,
Okay.
you're fasciculating.
So
Oh my
it's not
God, look at you. You're
fasciculation, but you just
fasciculating.
saying it in a funny way. It's
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's
fasciculation. Yeah.
fasciculation. Fasciculation.
Okay.
So Yeah, that kind of involuntary spasming that
Mm,
isn't painful, but it's intense.
mm.
Yeah, I don't know that that's good. I don't
It
know that
can't be,
working
right? Because your
yourself
muscle
to
must be like
exhaustion.
contracting. Yeah.
I don't know that working yourself to exhaustion is good. My experience on the couch, to use
Mm.
your terminology, I do not treat people on couches. For those of you listening in Americas, we have, you know, plinths and couches and tables. We use
Yeah.
treatment tables,
Right.
just like your dining room table, but not really. Anyway, the point being that what I find is sometimes when I'm applying manual therapy things, people will start to fasciculate who are under incredible tension, and you start to break that tension, and the muscle almost starts to involuntarily spasm,
Mm.
you know, but not in a painful way, because it's just like, I've been under so much tension and now it's leaving and I just have to shake it off, quite literally. So in the workout environment, I don't think that can be good for you. And I don't think, you know, in general, hamstring stretches work anyway.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to the original point, like doing kind of isolated static stretching is probably not the best thing if you want to stretch your fascia and you want to do the
Oh, definitely
best
not
thing
if you
for
want
your
to stretch
fascia.
your fascia. No, definitely not.
Right. So if we were to stretch our fascia, things like yoga, I can imagine, are fabulous. You mentioned yin yoga as well, which I'm a huge fan of
Hmm.
yin yoga. And it's basically when you hold poses for longer periods of time, so like 3 to 5 minutes. And I'm a huge fan, and I was really glad to see it in your book as one of the therapies, as one of the ways
Hmm.
to help your fascia. But that kind of leads me on to a question about, I think you called it, okay, I'm going to totally get it
Sure,
wrong here,
go for
but
it. No, that's fine.
somato emotional release. Because in my yoga class,
Hmm.
she's a fabulous teacher. She always says, the issues are in the tissues. And I'm always like, yes, the issues are in the tissues as I'm stretching and I'm just like releasing my emotions and so on.
Hmm.
You told a really interesting story in your book that you had
Hmm.
where you, when you were younger, you went through almost like strangulation, which is
Yes.
hugely traumatic. And
Yeah.
you didn't
I didn't go into all the
actually,
details, but I did hit the
no,
highlights. Yeah. Hmm.
that's the highlight and that's
Yeah.
enough. It's like that's the trauma.
Yeah.
And so and then but then that was that. And then you kind of got on with your life. And
Hmm.
then it was only in
I
your
processed it.
four was it only in your 40s, you said,
Yeah. Yeah.
that you were getting manual therapy in a class or something, and
Hmm.
then somebody did something with your neck muscle,
Hmm.
scalenes or something, and
Yes.
then suddenly you got the trauma, like you felt it again, all over again, like
Yeah.
all of the
Yeah.
emotions came up.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a bit, that is ostensibly correct. I wouldn't say that it was traumatic.
Okay.
It was startling because I didn't expect it, but suddenly it was just right there, very vivid. You know, the
Mm,
memory of that event. It was not re-traumatizing, and I think
okay.
we need to now, mind you, almost strangling to death. Yeah, that's kind of traumatic.
Right.
Um, you know, that's different than just like
Mm,
let's call them everyday insults. I don't think those things are traumatic. Sometimes that's just life.
yeah.
Um, but it didn't re-traumatize me.
Mm,
It did startle me. The person working on me noticed that, like, whoa, dude, you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. Just keep going. Um, and it came and went like the wind picking up and then just stopping.
mm,
So it didn't trigger any sort of cascade. And I had long ago um processed that event.
mm,
And I honestly can't remember the last time that I had thought about it up to that point. And I can't remember the last time I thought about it till you just brought it up, even
mm,
though it's in the book. So it's kind of curious. It's like, why was that there?
yeah.
Why was that there? And I don't, obviously, you know, for the region of my body where it was, that kind of makes sense. Now, I've worked with people who have survived traumatic things. I'm talking about, um, you know, combat things. I'm talking about sexual assault. I'm talking about physical assault. Uh, I'm talking about trauma with a capital T here. Okay, and And those kinds of things don't necessarily manifest where you would expect them to, if you think about it in a very A plus B plus C equal 1 plus 2 plus 1 equals 4 kind of way. Or, oh, if you were physically assaulted here, then this is probably got like has something to do
Where it is.
with where
Yeah.
it is, right?
Mm.
And then there's the 78-year-old who got hit by a car and thrown 20 feet and broke his femur in one place. It's now permanently shorter than the other, and broke his arm in 3 places, but it was not operable because of the swelling. He's doing great. He has no residual trauma from this traumatic event. So I just want to say that these things can and do manifest. It doesn't mean that they always manifest, or that if you've been through something traumatic, that you need to get it out of your tissues because it's still in there. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's kind of
Mm.
individualized, and we don't completely understand it.
Yeah.
And I used to have this wonderful mental idea that our fascia was some kind of living software that
Mm.
recorded everything that happened to us in some fashion. And the brain is just the processing unit that allows us to call it back up and things like that. And that was kind of intriguing for a while. And then I thought about it a little bit deeper. I also did a little more research into what the biochemistry of that might be. And then I had a realization that people who lose limbs, which is definitely a traumatic event, they don't lose memories.
Mm.
It's so
Yeah,
the
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. So yeah,
If it's in
so
the fascia and the fascia's gone, it's
right,
like,
right,
yeah.
right, 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 right. By the same token, having worked with people who have survived some of the traumas I mentioned earlier, and you might be working on an area where they have an SER, they have a somato emotional response to what you're doing. And it seems like an area that would be a nothing area for what you know of their story. And then maybe they share something with you about that. And to me, that's not a requirement. Anytime I'm working with people like that, it's like, if you need to be angry, if you need to cry, if you need to express anything, it's fine, but don't feel like you ever have to explain,
Mm.
because sometimes we explain, we get locked into our story, and that may not be what we need most in that moment. But sometimes people do feel like they have to. And I think the very act of compassionate touch in an area that has been traumatized may be the most powerful element of that.
And did you feel
That there
that?
is still, yeah, that
Yeah.
there is still on an autonomic level of the peripheral nervous system, of these sensory nerves that are still, after all these years, like the sensory nerves in the fascia of my right anterior scalene, they're still a little bit on guard. That
Mm.
happened. That's what I wonder about. So that I know we kind of went deep into the rabbit hole there.
No, I mean
So
that was great, and it kind of shows the benefits of having
mhm,
manual therapy, like having someone working on your muscles.
yeah,
Because if
yeah,
indeed the
hmm
traumas and emotions are in your tissues, then maybe all you
hmm
need, like it's not some magic, like someone touches your muscle and then the emotions come out and it's gone, and
yeah,
it's
mhm,
just like you said, just having compassionate touch, and that can just be healing in itself. I don't know if this is related at all, but when I
mhm,
always find whenever I do yin yoga, for some strange reason, I'm always thinking about my childhood. For some reason, it's really weird,
okay.
and I don't know
So
why. But I'm
you're in one
wondering
of
if
these
I'm in a
static but
class. Yeah,
supported positions. Yeah.
yes, in a supported position. So let's say I'm in like a pigeon pose or something, and I'll just
hmm
be there relaxing. But I always have very vivid memories of childhood, and it's happy memories. They're not traumas or anything. But I'm just
Yeah.
like I wonder to myself
You were
why.
traumatized by happiness, Tamara.
Yeah, I had such a good
Your childhood
childhood.
was too happy.
Other people are like, oh God, like surely something. But I find myself going to that same place. It's really
hmm
weird, like memories that
That's
I
great.
really haven't thought about before or for a very
hmm
long time. And I'm just like, why does that keep on happening in yin yoga? Like it's a very specific time that it happens. And I just wondered, like, if that is perhaps part of it, like, memories are stored in your tissues and you're kind of stretching them and then the memories come back. I don't know, like, it's bizarre. but
Mhm.
that's what I
Well,
mean. I don't know if it's
we're
related.
complicated. We're complicated beings.
Yeah,
I remain unconvinced that memories are stored in the tissues for reasons of my
right.
thought experiment about amputees. And I've looked at the research and I can't find anything about amputees and
Mm,
memory loss correlations. But there is, what you just said made me think of, when you were a kid and your parents were taking you somewhere and you were coming back from it and it was late and you kind of fall. You're not really asleep. This happens to me during acupuncture. Not
mm,
always, but often with acupuncture. But you're sleeping on the back seat of the car, which probably doesn't happen anymore because seatbelts. But back in the day when we didn't care about that stuff,
mm,
you can hear the hum of the engine. There's the sound of the road outside. Your dad's driving. You got 110% trust in his driving abilities. You feel completely comfortable and safe, and you're just aware of the sounds of everything around you, and you're not really asleep, but you're definitely not awake. I find that incredibly restful and restorative. Sometimes if there's people in the house and I'm going upstairs and taking a nap because I'm an old man, and I just hear those murmurs of voices coming from far away.
mm,
There's something very soothing to that. I'm wondering if that's some of what's happening to you in yin yoga. You just feel like I'm in a completely safe place, and your mind can just kind of go off to
mm,
that that place where you can observe your own thoughts and memories because you feel safe and comfortable to do it.
mm,
Um, don't know. It would be interesting um, to, like, again, the studies said like to do, but they take time and uh, and I hate to say it, but time is money. So you need the
mm,
money to make the time to take away
mm,
from the other things that you do to keep the lights on. But to work, it'd be great to like work with portable EEGs to
mm,
have some kind of pre-interview and post-interview in these kind of environments, and put the portable EEGs on, which are not terribly. Um, they, they kind of look like fancy hairnets, and see what sort of readings you get pre and post. I mean, we would need to put together some serious metrics to actually have the data mean anything, and that's also a problem in research. Sometimes it's like, well, let's just do it and see what we get. Is kind of hard because, well, what's your goal? But sometimes like getting some baseline data that would fascinate me, like
mm,
with you and in yoga, and always going back to these memories. There's another story you made me think of though that I did
mm,
want to share with the listeners. I was working with a child who had spina bifida. So, for those of you who don't know, spina bifida is a condition where the spinal cord itself does not seal.
mm,
So, these kids usually have permanent defects, like they'll have a leg that doesn't work right. That was the case with this young person. And his mother actually they called it in vitro surgery, which sounds much more Star Trek than it is. But when she was in her 8th month, early late 7th, early 8th month. They took her to this hospital where they were pioneering this technique, and they did a C-section. They took out the uterus. They took baby out of the uterus. They did surgery on the baby to stitch that part of the spine in the back up, put the baby back in the uterus, put the uterus back in mom, and said, okay, you can get up and go to the bathroom, but we don't want you to move very much for the next 2 months. Okay. This kid is amazing. I love this kid to pieces. He's a mover. He's a shaker. We did a
mm.
yoga class together. I looked at his mom and she's like, just make it up because his right leg doesn't work very well.
Right.
It could be completely splayed out behind him. And mom was always legs in front, legs in front. I mean, she was always getting on him to normalize the use of his body as much as possible. At the same time, his parents gave him every physical advantage to do the things. He's one of the most physically active kids I've ever met, and yet he has a right leg that doesn't work correctly or at all in some cases. Um, but she asked me to do a session on him. They're friends of the family we were visiting, and he was maybe 5, and so I was just doing some obvious stuff, and then I was doing some makeup stuff because it's okay sometimes as a therapist to like, well, let's try something that's not harmful and see if we get a response from this. I don't know because I've never worked on this situation before. So I had my hand kind of doing traction to his pelvis. He was on his back, And I was just kind of working with that whole leg and just trying to see what kind of nervous system response was there. Were things contracting? If I move it this way, what happens? What kind of physiological responses could I feel through my hands that his body was having? So that's kind of, there was no specific treatment or technique I was doing. It's just like, well, let's see what's possible to do here. So I did that, I don't know, for maybe 5, 6, 7 minutes. And then he looks at me and he rolls over and he pulls up his shirt and he points to his surgical scar and says, "Work here now, David." Yeah. And that was like, whoa.
Oh.
And then when I started working on that area, he started making this low keening sound, like, whoa.
Mm.
And it was not pain. What I was doing was not causing pain. He wasn't having a pain reaction, but it was almost as if he was trying to express something that he felt from a long time ago that he was not able to express at the time.
Mm.
Maybe even in utero. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But his mom's looking at me and I'm looking at his mom, and and it's like, hey, this is like, we're all good here. But it was one of those things that I think about a lot,
Wow.
you know. But I don't think we should take from that everything that happens to us necessarily is recorded in a way that needs to be released, or somehow we're still
Mm.
holding on to it, or our healing isn't complete. I do think that is a factor in some cases. I don't think it has to be with everything. There's a
Mm.
great book out there called Resilience, about people who've had traumatic things happen to them that don't seem to have any lasting after effects after it.
Mm.
So it does happen. We don't understand it. I don't know how you would study it,
Yeah,
but
that's a tough
it's,
one. But like you
yeah,
said,
it's,
it's a developing, like fascia is developing over the years, and it might take some time, but who knows? Like it might actually, we might have the equipment to
yeah,
be able to do so
it,
at some point.
yeah, one of the lectures I used to give in integrative medicine circles was fascia is the link. It's the missing link to the mind body connection. You could
Mm.
argue mind body are always connected, and of course they are, but in some way the fascial system is the governor in a long way of that mind body connection. A lot of that has to do with sensory nerves. It doesn't necessarily mean that our history is written in it beyond a biomechanical sense.
I'm a nutritionist, and so I on my podcast I talk about food and the gut
Mm-hmm.
health and things like that. So the fascia, um, it's like a pocket, like a coating for everything. Like in your book, you talk about how it coats, how it kind of holds on to the organs and how it penetrates the digestive system. And so if somebody has a poor diet, and let's say their gut is in a bad way, let's say it's inflamed, or it's got some issues, it's got some leaky gut. I don't know how familiar you are with some of those terms, but
I'm somewhat.
yeah,
Mhm.
somewhat. But let's say that their gut is not in a good way. If the fascia penetrates the digestive system and everything else from head to toe, how does a poor diet affect somebody's body? Like the way they hold themselves, let's say posture, their breathing, their pelvic
Uh,
floor. Like, does it, how much of an impact does a bad diet have on your fascial system?
I don't know that there is any solid information about the specifics of that.
Hmm.
Um, what I can say is, if you're not getting adequate amounts of vitamin C, it will have a
Mm.
negative effect on your fascia.
Right.
So this person may have a bad diet, but they might drink a lot of orange juice. So
Right.
that
Okay.
might not affect them as much. Most of the dietary things around fascia are about that. So if we go back to scurvy, if people remember what scurvy is,
Mm.
which was, they discovered that people who were out at sea for long periods of time, they would have old wounds open up. That's because the collagen lost its integrity and the
Mm.
wounds reopened. That was one of the first ever randomized clinical trials ever done on scurvy and vitamin C. Not that they called it that way back in the 1700s, but that's what it was. So that's the one pearl that I can give your
Mm.
listeners. And the other thing is, if they're taking collagen with the idea of improving their fascia in some way, they're probably not going to get that result,
Mm,
because again, fascia is very impact dependent. In terms of the cells that regulate it, they respond to pressure and vibration.
mhm.
So collagen may be good for having, better skin, nails, hair. I don't know. That's what I hear. But if you're taking collagen supplements for your fascial system, let's say you're trying to rehab that ankle injury, you need to be getting out and loading it within a half hour, 45 minutes of taking that supplement. And you need to be sure you're getting adequate amounts of vitamin C when you do.
Right.
But it's the loading that helps the body metabolize the collagen where it needs it.
Okay. So the core then, I imagine the core because it's so packed with muscles and organs and tissues, and it's just the most complex part, I'd say, of our bodies. I can imagine when it comes to fascia, things can get funky. So funky
Mm-hmm.
fascia in the core. And what I
Funky
wanted
fascia
to
in the
funky
core.
fascia
Do
in
do
the
do
core.
boom boom ba I love it.
There's a lot of things we need to trademark here,
Yeah,
like
trademark
funky
that one
fascia
too.
and um, but when it comes to women, especially when it comes to, obviously we go through childbirth, so we have pregnancy and then we have the
Mhm.
actual childbirth and the labor and all of the trauma that happens to our muscles and to our organs. And how is a woman affected in terms of fascia after having children?
Well, it's going to be individualized
Mm,
again. Having, in my experience, if I think about all the post childbirth women I've worked with over the years, I can't say that there was a single one of them that fit a specific pattern,
mm,
but they all had issues. I'm thinking about someone right now
mm.
who, uh, as I said, gave birth to Thanksgiving dinner. Her baby was 11 pounds 2 ounces,
Whoa.
and this is like 6'1" super fit woman person, but it really messed up her pelvic floor.
Wow.
And some other things. Yeah, and so she needed a really good pelvic floor therapist to help her renormalize. I could do my fascial stuff with her, and
Mhm,
she'd feel better for a day or two, and then boom, right back where it started, as if I never treated. So it's like, okay, you need something that is not what I do to renormalize. Then I think about the person that I worked with. So the when you think about being pregnant, think about being pregnant, and imagine a pregnant person looking at them in profile. They can adopt a shape, and not all women do this, but some do, that looks a bit like a greater than sign. So the chest and the rib cage are way up at an
mhm,
angle towards the head, and the hips are way down at an angle towards the feet. Okay.
mhm.
Excuse me. And the low back gets kind of shortened and pinched. And I worked with somebody who her baby was at this point a child and 5 years old, and they still looked like that.
Mm,
They still looked like a greater than sign. And I see people who've never had children, including men, who look like that too. They don't always have the same complaints. But one of the things that stuck with me about this mother was that she claimed that after she gave birth, she never breathed right again, and she just assumed that that's what happens after you have a kid, is that your breathing
mhm,
changes. And to an informed person, that seems kind of silly. But if you don't know any different, I can't blame somebody for not knowing what they don't know. So she just accepted, and so that was one of the biggest things. I'm trying to horizontalize her pelvis and horizontalize her her rib cage. And I'm thinking about the breathing thing. Is like, okay, that's really super important here too. But that's where she noticed it the most. That was a much more physiologically rich area for her than actually undoing her greater than sign syndrome. So
oh,
it's really highly, and there's other people that have a baby and they're mostly fine. It's like maybe
yeah,
one or two treatments, and boom, there's just a little fine tuning here and there. Their body's kind of just back to the
yeah.
other thing. There's so many factors involved in that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because, as you're talking about the breathing, I said, yep, me, because that's exactly what happened to me. And I still get bouts of that sometimes where I can't breathe properly. And I'm just like, and I've had Pilates, I've had a couple of Pilates instructors, and I've told them both about this. And, we've tried to work through it. It's mostly better now. But
Hmm.
oh my gosh, like the only way I can describe it is, when someone tells you to think about your breathing and you think about it and then suddenly you
Yeah.
can't breathe because you're trying to control it too much, you
Yes.
know,
Try to think of nothing. Yeah.
try to
Hmm.
think of
Yeah.
nothing and then
Doesn't work.
it's very much like that. It's like I start focusing on my breathing too much and then suddenly I'm kind of catching my breath and I can't breathe properly, and that could last for like an afternoon. Like it was terrible. Thankfully it happens less, but the only thing I could bring it down to is just a fundamental core dysfunction, like fundamentally, like from pelvic floor to diaphragm to all
Hmm.
the bits in between. Like, because my first birth was probably more physically traumatic than my second. My second was quite easygoing, but my first
Sure.
was like there was a
That's
lot
not
more.
uncommon.
Yeah. So I mean, I can imagine, like, that's why I'm saying funky fascia. Like I can imagine for someone like myself or your client, things, I can imagine the fascia is very funky in there. Like something's going on. I can't understand it. But
Hmm.
I mean, do core exercises help in that case, like just regular core exercises, or is there some fascia kind of core specialized fascial stretches that you could recommend? Or
Again, I am a very pattern-based
mm,
individual. Without being able to see the pattern,
yeah. Mm,
and whether it's a pattern that is part of their posture or a pattern that's part of their movement or both,
mm,
you know, in the absence of any visual information, that's where the anatomical information comes in.
right.
So there's not there's, at least in my world, there's not a lot of if then statements
Mm,
in that regard. But what I can say is that it is a really, and you mentioned it yourself, but it's a relationship of the more superficial abdominal muscles.
mm,
Was it a C-section? How badly did they how did they repair the rectus abdominis? What's the condition of the rectus sheath?
mm,
Is it, the psoas is involved, the iliacus is going to be involved, the quadratus lumborum, which is the next door neighbor of the psoas, which are the downstairs neighbors from the diaphragm, which sits under the rib cage like an umbrella.
mm,
It's not this flat thing, it's this very volumetric thing, and it's very, very difficult in dissection to see where the psoas, which is the muscle that runs parallel on either side of your lumbar, your low spine, where the psoas ends and the diaphragm begins. So we sometimes like to joke that the psoas is a muscle of breathing and the diaphragm is a muscle of walking. And there is some physiological truth to that. So all those players are going to be involved. And then of course you have the weaving of the intercostals throughout all the ribs, the scalenes, which go from the neck to the first few ribs that can pull up or forward on the rib cage. It's a very rich area for treatment,
mm,
and it's going to vary from person to person, from individual to individual. And one of the simplest things you can do to bring it back to make it all about you, Tamara, is when you're feeling like, okay, I become so self-conscious of my breath, I don't know how to breathe, is you can just see where is my body not moving when I'm breathing, and just put your hand on that spot, just to tell your nervous system, over here. It's like you don't have to figure it all out with your brain. You can use your most proximal tool, your hand, to direct your body where you want it to go, or under the armpits, and breathing out to the sides, which is where people lose a lot of the breathing. It's all they're poofing out their belly super, super big, but they're not realizing that the rib cage needs to expand out in the sides as well. So there's all sorts of things you can do just using your own hands or just anything to draw attention to that area and tell those sensory nerves, the majority of which are in the superficial fascia, in the layer between the muscles and the skin. Over
Mm.
here, buddy.
Mm. So that shows why it's good that your hands are quite effective because it's superficial, so it's not far from the surface. So, it can
Yeah,
sense
you
where
don't
your
always have to
hands
go
are.
digging in there and go to town. Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't.
I wanted to start the question with just a part in your book when you talk about the symptoms of fascia dysfunction. And
Okay.
as I was going through the list, I was like, gosh, don't we all feel these at some point? So, for example,
Hmm.
dull aches or pains that don't seem to go away. Yes, I get that
Hmm.
definitely in one leg for sure. Diminished proprioception or balance. Yes, that happens to people. Pain when performing simple movements. Yes. Reduced flexibility or lack of resilience when in a bouncing motion. So,
Hmm.
all of these signs of fascial dysfunction, they seem like something that we all get to some degree, especially as we
Yeah.
age. So
Hmm.
do we all need to work on our fascia?
Well, I'm going to say we all need to be aware of
Mm.
our fascia. Okay. Um, and I was just laughing because something else we have to work on.
Yeah, so
Man,
something else we
life
have
is
to
life
do.
is so hard. Um, in the in simple words, yes.
Mm,
Now, every time you feel a dull ache, does that mean it's fascial? Not necessarily. Every time you feel, if we go down your list there, it's like, okay, sometimes that's just life. You
mm,
get up in the morning and you're like, oh man, I feel really stiff, but you get moving around and suddenly it's like, oh, okay, yeah, everything's kind of good.
mm,
But 3, 4 days later, oh, that hip, that's still not feeling right. And you go to the chiropractor and then you're fine for a few weeks. Okay, that's fine. You go to the chiropractor and you feel fine for a day and it's right back where it started. It's when the interventions that you're doing to remediate whatever it is on that list that you just read are not responding to what's going on.
mm.
They feel better briefly, but nothing seems to be lasting. That to me is the sine qua non, the thing that is absolutely essential to determining, oh, this might be a problem with the fascia.
Right.
So that's my guiding light. I mean, so as a manual therapist, my job is to put myself out of work. So if you came to see me with some of these breathing issues, we would do some things, we'd see how you respond, and then we would come up with a treatment plan that might get you out of my office in as little as 5 visits, depending on what we think is the core issue here. But certainly within a 12 to 14 range of visits, people will, you will get the body growing back in the direction that they want to go. And then their own physiological processes of moving through the day are going to help reset that. And that's the same thing if you're doing yin yoga or anything else. If you're bringing that functional awareness to, okay, hey, I just did that and I feel great. And I feel great tomorrow and I feel great the day after tomorrow. Oh, today, oh, that's bothering me again. Okay, wait, one minute. What am I doing right now at this moment where this thing is talking back to me again that I don't want to hear from anymore? And you start observing and you start seeing your own patterns. So maybe there is something that you're doing. I think the key word here, and I learned it from a patient of mine who was 3 years old, stuck. When you're feeling stuck in your body, that's the biggest sign that you need to do something regarding your fascia. And if you're already doing yoga, you're doing a good fascial workout.
Mm.
If you want to incorporate that into your gym practice, like I talked, what was it, 3 hours ago? Uh, thank you for everybody for listening. This has been a long one, but I've been having a great time. I hope
Yeah,
you
if
have
you're
too.
still with us, well done.
Yeah. So it's like all these things are good. And it's about you as an individual to decide like when and where you need to incorporate them and how you need to incorporate them. And I think the place that, you know, um, we don't get a lot of physical education in our educational systems. Physical education is play a sport, and that's good. We need to play sports, particularly for kids and teenagers, and we need to play different kinds of sports. I don't know about, of course, you're down in the islands, Mon, but the thing here in the United States that's really big is this one sport idea. They're like,
Mm,
wow, you're really good at this sport, so you're going to play that all year long. That's horrible. We
mm,
have teenagers getting orthopedic injuries that they should never have because they should be playing football, soccer in the fall, and then they should transition to basketball in the winter time, and then when spring comes, they should play baseball or whatever it is. But they should be mixing it up so their bodies are getting a high variety of different kinds of things in their movement diet. And I think that's the other important thing too. I got these really, cut guys who are like, yeah, I've seen yoga and I can't do that. My body doesn't bend that way. It's like, no, you need to add that because that's the thing you're not getting from being a gym rat. You're losing some of your resilience and your flexibility. Some people who are super flexy need to spend more time on doing strength training. So
mm.
we tend to lean into the things that we're really good at, but sometimes to the detriment of being as resilient as we could be. So I think back to a performer I once worked on who had a fantastic body, and it seemed achievable. Like they seemed like the right balance of muscle and flexibility, and of course their stamina, their physicality, and their appearance was a big part of what made them money and how they moved through the world. So it's very important that they spent a lot of time, probably 4 hours a day, working on their physicality. But 1 hour of that day was always devoted to some kind of stretch or movement, not just hardcore strength building or functional movement. And that's what he equated um, his balance, which was phenomenal, uh, to being able to do that. So it's about, finding the right combinations, having good guides, and also being okay to say, you know what, I don't really like doing this. Like, I would love to have a runner's body. I don't like running. Maybe it's my bunions. Maybe it's the fact that I live in an urban environment, but I get 3 blocks away and it's like, I could just turn around and go home right now.
Mm.
I love doing yoga. Okay. There's other things that I love. I love a good game of badminton. Tennis, I probably, if I'd started earlier, but it's like I would suck right now, and I can't imagine like how long it would take for me to be competent enough to enjoy playing the game. But enjoying what you're doing or finding enjoyment in an aspect of it
Mm.
is really important because that's physiologically going to have a big impact too. So, when I work with runners in their 50s and they're like, do I have to stop running? I'm like, no, but maybe you need to maybe change how you're running or your expectations about how much you can and should do. But don't give up doing the thing you love. Let's just find a way to do it that doesn't deteriorate you and break you down in the process.
So balance is key. Doing a range of different movements, not nothing too repetitive over too long a time. Um, Stretching, preferably something like yoga that incorporates some strengthening as well.
Yeah.
Is there anything else like in a day like that someone could do to keep their fascia healthy? Would self massage help or
It's funny because when you said that, it sounded like mash
yeah,
sausage.
like that's what I was about to say.
And that's what you don't want to do. That's what you
It's
don't
not.
want to do. Those I had somebody once, those percussion things that are real um,
Mm.
uh, trendy right now, and I like those. They're very good. I had somebody break one, and I'm like, dude, you need to pull back.
Right.
You are overdoing it. You are overdoing it, man. I don't know why. I don't want to go there,
Yeah, that
but
like
you are overdoing it.
Theragons and
Yeah, yeah. He broke a Theragun. He
yeah,
broke a
he broke a
Theragun.
Theragun. I
He
mean,
broke a
do
Theragun.
you recommend tools like that, like these trendy
Yeah, no, I
tools?
think
Okay,
I think
cool.
they're good. I have a number of ones that I use myself.
Mm,
There's one that I don't have it in front of me here, but the same people I think who make the Theragun. That's a rubber ball with textures in it
mhm.
that vibrates at 3 different speeds, and it's great because I can just hold it in my hand on the way home after a long day of doing therapy. Um, I can lean it back against the wall. I can work on it with my plantar fascia on the
Yeah.
floor. It's like, hey, yeah, this works, and I feel better when I do it.
Okay.
Is key. There's somewhere else I wanted to go with this, and I think I got a little further afield talking about the guy who broke the Theragun. So what was your question again? Sorry.
So just for anybody who's like, right,
Mhm.
so I understand that
Yeah.
fascia is important now. So yes, I've got to
Right.
exercise. I know that I've got to do bring some stretching in.
Mhm.
Massage would be good. Like, yeah, have someone
Yeah.
manually getting in
Okay.
there
Yeah.
and
So things I can do during the day, things I can do during the
mm,
day where I don't need special equipment or something like that. So, okay. So it's all about that balance,
mm,
between strength and flexibility. So, what are some things I could do during the day? Well, when you're in the grocery store and there's something on the bottom shelf you need, are you going to bend? Or are you going to squat? How about
mm.
squatting to get that thing off the bottom shelf? Or when I'm taking the laundry out of the dryer, I'm going to squat. So I try to build, I build squats into my daily routine. It's just something that I do. Or hey, maybe I'm going to take 2 steps at a time going up the stairs to my second floor.
Mm.
I'm going to vary that up a little bit. Or maybe I'm going to turn the light on with my foot. I'm just going to go, like a karate move
I
and
did
flip
that
the switch
yesterday with the
with my foot.
lift.
Yeah, there you
I
go. There
went,
you go.
how? Because I was holding on to my
Yeah.
kid. So I was
Yeah,
like,
it's really fun to do. Do you wear the 5-toed shoes at all?
no, I used to the Vibrams, or
Yeah,
I'm sure there's other
yeah, I,
brands.
I I
Yeah.
used to, and it's actually they're great for my feet. And when I'm working in the garden, I love it. But if I've got those on, or if depending on what shoes I have, it's like when you get to the elevator and you hit the elevator button with your foot, that always gets looks from people. But I don't care. But that's just it. Like, what are some normal things that you do? I cannot brush my teeth with my feet. I'm not even going to try. But what are just some normal, simple, repetitive, mechanical things that you do every day that you could do a little bit differently?
I like
I
that.
think that's
Yeah.
a great way to stay aware of those areas and to strengthen them, both in terms of physical strength, but also sensory strength. They say being able to squat into old age is a big determiner on how well you age or don't. So, start doing dynamic squatting through the house. Let's make a video and sell it.
I think people should start recording videos of them like turning on buttons like on the wall, light switches, and like
Yeah,
with their
absolutely.
feet. Like, and that should be like
Hmm.
everyone should just submit their videos and just
Yeah,
kind of
and you and I,
strangest
yeah,
one
okay.
wins.
I'm all for it. They get an autographed copy of my book. And the other thing is like right here, I've got my standing desk, which is going to start rising right
Mm,
about now, and so I shut it off. But that's as somebody who writes, as somebody who does things online, it's great to be able to do that and vary that.
mm,
And I was just reading that in terms of, oh, I forget what the physiological marker was, but that if you're sitting a lot through the day, you should at least stand for 3 minutes every hour.
mm.
And that may have to do with venous return of blood through the calves. I don't remember where that was. I'm going to go back and look that up. So simple, easy things like that
Mm. I like that.
can make, again, in the long run, a big difference. This is we're not talking about getting results here in days or weeks. We're talking about doing this for the long term, weeks to months.
Yeah. And I like that because so many people just recommend, get off the bus one stop earlier and take the stairs instead of the lift. And we've all heard that before, but I quite like how yours are slightly more unique than that. It's a bit more specific and it's a bit more different. So I think, that's things I'm definitely going to bring into my daily life as well. Like that
Great. Well,
button with
I'm
the
looking
foot. I
forward to the new
love that
ones that you come
idea.
up with.
Yeah. David, that was such a fabulous conversation. I just wanted to thank you for being so generous with your time because I know you must be so
You're,
busy.
you're very welcome. It was a delightful conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, fabulous. Well, thank you so much. I hope we get to do it again.